She danced on the biggest stages in Hollywood. She sang her way into the hearts of millions. She acted alongside some of the greatest names in cinema history. But every single time the cameras were rolling, every single time the lights hit her face, every single time the audience applauded, they were applauding a woman who did not exist. Because the real woman behind the smile, behind the performances, behind the carefully constructed identity, was someone Hollywood would have never allowed on that screen. Her name was Dona Drake. And this is the story they never wanted you to know. Welcome to another educational video on the history of the elites. If this is your first time here, comment below where you're watching from, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on our future videos. There is something deeply uncomfortable about the golden age of Hollywood that most people do not want to talk about. Behind the glitter and the glamour, behind the perfectly curated images of stardom and success, there existed a brutal and unforgiving system of racial hierarchy that determined who got to be seen, who got to be heard, and who got to matter. If you were black in Hollywood during the 1940s and 1950s, your options were devastatingly limited. You could play a servant. You could play a criminal. You could play a background character who existed only to make the white protagonist look better. You could be someone's comic relief. But you could not be the star. You could not be the lead. You could not be the woman that the audience fell in love with. The system simply would not allow it. And so some people made a choice. A radical, dangerous, and deeply human choice. They chose to become someone else entirely. They chose to step into a different identity, a different background, a different story, and dare Hollywood to look close enough to find the truth. Dona Drake was one of those people. And her story is one of the most remarkable, most heartbreaking, and most extraordinary stories to ever come out of Hollywood. A story of talent so undeniable that it could not be suppressed. A story of survival so calculated that it fooled an entire industry. A story of a woman who refused to let a racist system decide what she was worth. This is that story. Early life, the mystery begins. Here is where things get complicated. And the complication itself tells you everything you need to know about who Dona Drake really was. Most public records list her birth name as Rita Rio. Most public records suggest she was born around 1914, though some sources place her birth as late as 1920. Some records say she was born in Mexico. Others place her birth in the United States. The inconsistencies are everywhere you look, and they are not accidental. When a person's birth records are this difficult to pin down, when the details of their early life are this deliberately obscured, it is almost never a coincidence. It is almost always the result of someone working very hard to make sure that a certain truth stayed buried. What historians and researchers who have looked closely at Dona Drake's life have found is that she was very likely African American, born in the United States, not in Mexico. Born into a country that had very specific and very brutal ideas about what black people were allowed to become. Born into an entertainment industry that was just beginning to understand its own power, and that was using that power to reflect and reinforce the racial prejudices of the society that created it. The details of her childhood are scarce. We know very little about her parents, her siblings, or the community she grew up in. And again, this scarcity of information is telling. People who are hiding do not leave paper trails. People who are reinventing themselves do not hold on to the documents that connect them to who they used to be. What we do know is that from a very early age, Dona Drake, or Rita Rio, or whatever name she carried before she built the identity that the world would come to know, was extraordinarily talented. She could sing, she could dance, she could perform with a charisma and a presence that was impossible to ignore. And in another world, in a world where talent was the only currency that mattered, she would have been a superstar from the very beginning. But this was not that world, and she knew it, the decision to pass. Let us take a moment to really understand what racial passing meant in America during this era, because without that understanding, you cannot fully appreciate what Dona Drake was doing or why she was doing it. Racial passing refers to the practice of a person of one racial group being accepted as a member of another racial group. In the American context, it most commonly referred to light-skinned African Americans who could, by appearance alone, be perceived as white or as members of another ethnic group. And it was not simply a matter of personal preference or identity exploration. It was a survival strategy. It was a response to a system so violently and comprehensively racist that the only way to access basic human opportunities was to step outside the identity that system had decided to punish. For someone like Dona Drake, who had the talent to be a major entertainment figure, but the wrong racial background to be accepted as one, passing offered a way out. By presenting herself as Latina, as someone of Mexican heritage, she was stepping into a category that Hollywood had at least some space for. Latina women were still exercised, still limited, still pushed into particular kinds of roles. But they were on screen in a way that Black women simply were not. At least not in the kinds of roles that built careers. The decision to pass was not made lightly. It meant leaving behind your true identity, possibly cutting ties with family members whose appearance might reveal the truth, living every single day with the knowledge that your entire career rested on a secret that could be exposed at any moment. It meant performing not just on stage and on screen, but all day, in every interaction, in every interview, in every photograph. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. And for Dona Drake, it was apparently the price she was willing to pay. The emergence of Dona Drake. Dona Drake emerged onto the entertainment scene in the late 1930s, initially building her reputation as a performer in the music world. She worked as a bandleader, an incredibly rare achievement for a woman of any background during that era, let alone a woman navigating the additional complexities of her particular situation. Her musical talent was genuine and recognized. She performed with energy and sophistication, leading her band with the kind of commanding presence that audiences responded to immediately. She could work a room. She could hold an audience. She had that ineffable quality that separates performers from entertainers, the ability to make every person watching feel like she was performing specifically for them. It was this talent that opened the door to Hollywood, because Hollywood, whatever its many flaws, was always hungry for talent, and Dona Drake had it in abundance. She began appearing in films in the early 1940s, initially in smaller roles that allowed audiences and studios alike to get comfortable with her presence on screen. These early appearances showcased a performer who was clearly capable of much more than the material she was being given, and the industry took notice. Her exotic beauty, a description that was itself a product of the racial dynamics she was navigating, was frequently commented upon in the press coverage of the time. She was presented as this mysterious, alluring figure of Latin heritage, and audiences responded to that presentation with genuine enthusiasm. The persona was working, the strategy was paying off. But beneath every smile in every promotional photograph, beneath every gracious interview response, beneath every carefully constructed public appearance, was a woman holding her breath, waiting, wondering how long it could last. Hollywood in the 1940s, the world she navigated. To understand Dona Drake's career, you have to understand Hollywood in the 1940s. You have to understand the specific and suffocating racial architecture of an industry that was shaping American culture, while simultaneously reflecting American prejudice back at itself. The 1940s were a period of enormous contradiction in Hollywood. On one hand, the studio system was at the height of its power, producing films that reached virtually every corner of American society and creating stars who became genuine cultural icons. On the other hand, the studio system was built on a foundation of exclusion, a carefully maintained hierarchy that determined who got to be seen as fully human on screen and who did not. Black performers who did work in Hollywood during this era, figures like Hattie McDaniel, Butterfly McQueen, and others, were largely confined to roles that reinforced racial stereotypes, rather than challenged them. Hattie McDaniel famously won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in 1940 for her role in Gone with the Wind, becoming the first African American to win an Oscar. But even that historic achievement came with the humiliation of being seated at a segregated table, separated from the film's white stars at the awards ceremony itself. The message was clear. You can be talented enough to win our highest honor, but you cannot sit with us while you receive it. This was the world that Dona Drake was operating in. This was the landscape she had assessed and decided she could not navigate as herself. And so she became someone else. Her film career, the performances. Let us talk about the work. Because whatever the circumstances that surrounded her career, the work itself was real. The performances were genuine, and they deserved to be recognized for what they were. Dona Drake appeared in a number of significant Hollywood productions during the 1940s and 1950s. Her film credits include Without Reservations in 1946, a romantic comedy starring Claudette Colbert and John Wayne, in which Drake held her own against two of Hollywood's biggest stars. The fact that she could share a screen with John Wayne and Claudette Colbert and not be overshadowed is a testament to the sheer force of her presence as a performer. She appeared in Another Part of the Forest in 1948, an adaptation of Lillian Hellman's play that was itself a prequel to Hellman's famous work, The Little Foxes. This was serious dramatic material, the kind of project that serious actors pursued, and Dona Drake's involvement in it speaks to the level at which she was operating professionally. She appeared in So This Is Paris in 1954, again demonstrating her range and her ability to work across different genres and different types of material. Throughout her career, she demonstrated a versatility that many performers with far more celebrated legacies never managed to achieve. And running through all of these performances was that quality that had defined her from the very beginning: presence, charisma, the ability to take whatever space she was given and fill it completely. Audiences who watched her work understood, even if they could not quite articulate why, that they were watching someone special. But Hollywood is not just about talent. It never has been. It is about narratives, about categories, about who gets to be the hero of the story. And the narrative that Hollywood had constructed around Dona Drake, the narrative of the exotic Latina performer, was always going to limit how far that story could go. The double performance, living the lie. Here is something that almost never gets discussed when people talk about racial passing. And it is something that is absolutely central to understanding what Dona Drake's life actually looked like on a day-to-day basis. When you are passing, the performance never stops. It is not something you do on screen and then take off when you go home. It is not a costume you can remove at the end of the day. It is your entire life. Every conversation is a performance. Every interview is a performance. Every casual interaction with a colleague or a journalist or a studio executive is a performance. You are always on. Think about what that means practically. It means you cannot let your guard down, ever. It means that moments of genuine relaxation, of simply being yourself, become luxuries you cannot afford. It means that friendships are complicated by the knowledge that the person you are presenting to your friend is not entirely real. It means that romantic relationships carry an additional weight of secrecy that most people will never have to navigate. It means that your success, real and genuine as it is also a source of anxiety rather than pure joy. Because every achievement raises the stakes. Every new film, every new audience, every new round of press coverage is another opportunity for the secret to be discovered. Success does not make you safer. In some ways, it makes you more vulnerable. Dona Drake lived this reality for her entire career. She maintained her constructed identity with remarkable consistency, giving interviews as Rita Rio, the Latina performer, discussing her background in ways that were carefully calibrated to reinforce the image she had created. She was not simply an actress playing characters on screen. She was an actress playing a character in her own life. And the stakes of that performance were infinitely higher than anything she did in front of a camera. What her secret reveals about Hollywood. Let us step back from Dona Drake's individual story for a moment and look at what it reveals about the industry she was part of. Because her story is not just her story. It is a window into something much larger and much more systemic. The fact that a woman of Dona Drake's talent felt it was necessary to construct an entirely false identity in order to access the career she deserved tells you everything about what Hollywood was during its so-called golden age. The golden age was golden for some people. For others, it was a cage. A beautifully decorated cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. Dona Drake was not the only person navigating these waters. Historians have documented numerous cases of light-skinned African Americans who passed as white or as members of other ethnic groups in order to access opportunities in entertainment and other fields during this era. The phenomenon was widespread precisely because the barriers were so absolute. When a system closes every legitimate door, people find windows. What makes Hollywood's specific version of this story particularly painful is the irony at its heart. Hollywood was in the business of telling stories about the full range of human experience. It was in the business of empathy, of helping audiences understand and connect with lives different from their own. And yet, it was simultaneously maintaining a system that declared certain human lives not worthy of representation, not worthy of being the protagonist of their own story. Dona Drake saw through that contradiction. She understood that the gatekeepers of Hollywood's empathy machine had no empathy for people who looked like her, and she decided that if they were going to tell stories, she was going to be in them, whatever it took. The personal cost, every choice has a cost, and the choice to pass, the choice to build an entire public identity on a foundation of concealed truth, exacts a particular kind of cost that goes deeper than anything that shows up in a career retrospective. What did Dona Drake give up? Who did she leave behind? What parts of herself did she have to suppress, day after day after day, in order to maintain the fiction that made her career possible? These are questions that are difficult to answer with certainty, because the very nature of her secret means that the most personal aspects of her life were the most carefully hidden. But we can reason about what the experience likely felt like, because human psychology gives us insight into the cost of sustained identity concealment. Research and historical accounts from people who passed during this era consistently describe a profound and persistent sense of loneliness. When you cannot be fully honest about who you are, genuine intimacy becomes almost impossible. The people who know you know a version of you, and there is always a part of you that wonders whether they would still be there if they knew the whole truth. There is also the grief of disconnection from community. African American culture and community during the 1940s and 1950s was rich, vibrant, and extraordinarily creative. The Harlem Renaissance had just passed, leaving in its wake a flowering of Black artistic achievement that was transforming American culture. Jazz, blues, literature, visual art, the intellectual and creative output of Black America during this period was staggering. And Dona Drake, in order to maintain her secret, would have had to keep her distance from all of it. The very community that might have celebrated her most genuinely, the community whose culture and creativity and resilience had helped shape her into the performer she was a community she could not publicly claim. That is a profound loss, and it is a loss that should not be forgotten when we celebrate her achievements, her legacy, what she actually achieved. Now let us talk about what she actually achieved. Because even accounting for all the complexity of her circumstances, the achievements themselves are remarkable. Dona Drake built a career in Hollywood during one of the most restrictive and discriminatory periods in the industry's history. She did it with intelligence, with strategy, and with talent that was genuine and undeniable. She appeared in major studio productions alongside the biggest stars of her era. She worked as a bandleader at a time when that was virtually unheard of for women. She maintained a public profile and a professional reputation over multiple decades. She did all of this while carrying a secret that, if revealed, could have destroyed everything. And she did it in an industry where the machinery of exposure was always running, where journalists were always looking for the story beneath the story, where studio executives had financial incentives to know everything about the people on their payroll. The fact that she sustained her career as long as she did is itself a remarkable achievement. The fact that she produced work of genuine quality during that career makes it more remarkable still. And the fact that she navigated the impossible terrain of racial identity in Golden Age Hollywood without the support of the community that understood her situation most intimately, makes her story one of extraordinary individual strength. She was, in every meaningful sense of the word, a pioneer. Not the kind of pioneer who gets to stand in front of crowds and receive recognition for their trailblazing. The other kind. The kind who blazes trails in secret, who clears the path without being able to put their name on the work, who makes things possible for others without being able to claim credit for what they made possible. The broader conversation, race identity, and Hollywood today. Dona Drake's story did not end with her. The conversations it opens are conversations that are still very much alive today, and that is part of what makes her story so important to tell. Hollywood has changed enormously since the 1940s. The explicit segregation of the studio system is gone. Black performers now access roles and achieve levels of recognition that would have been literally unimaginable during Dona Drake's era. The industry has produced black directors, black producers, black studio executives, black stars of global magnitude. And yet the conversations about representation, about who gets to tell which stories, about whose experiences are considered universal enough to anchor a major film, about the subtle and not so subtle ways that racial hierarchy continues to shape what gets made and who gets celebrated. Those conversations are ongoing. They have not been resolved. The work is not finished. Dona Drake's story connects to all of it. When we look at her life and understand the lengths she had to go to simply to do the work she was born to do, we are forced to reckon with the cost of the systems we build and maintain. We are forced to ask what talent is being lost, what stories are not being told, what voices are being silenced, because the gatekeepers of our cultural institutions have decided that certain people do not belong. Her story is a mirror, and what it reflects back is not always comfortable to look at. What history owes her? Dona Drake passed away on January 1st, 1989. She died as she had lived, with her secret largely intact, without the full recognition that her career and her extraordinary life deserved. History has not been particularly kind to her memory. She is not a household name. She does not have the kind of retrospective celebration that her peers from the golden age of Hollywood receive. Most people who encounter her name for the first time do so in a footnote, in a list of supporting players from a film they are researching for some other reason. That is an injustice. Not a dramatic, headline-making injustice, but a quiet, persistent injustice of the kind that history specializes in when it comes to women who do not fit neatly into its preferred narratives. What does history owe Dona Drake? It owes her the truth. It owes her the acknowledgement that she was not simply a Latina performer who had a modest career in Hollywood. She was a black woman who had an extraordinary career in Hollywood, despite a system specifically designed to prevent her from having one. She was a strategist, a survivor, an artist, and a pioneer. It owes her the recognition that her secret was not a personal failing or a source of shame. It was a rational response to an irrational and unjust system. The shame belongs to the system, not to the woman who found a way to survive it. It owes her a place in the larger story of Black achievement in American entertainment, a story in which she played a real and significant role, even if that role was played under a different name. And it owes her the simple dignity of being seen, fully and honestly, for who she actually was. Why her story matters now. You might be wondering why any of this matters in the present moment. Why should we spend time excavating the life of a woman who died in 1989, who was never a major star, whose secret was so well kept that most people have never heard of her? It matters because stories like hers are the stories that explain us to ourselves. The history of a culture is not just the history of its triumphs and its officially celebrated figures. It is also the history of what it forced people to hide, what it refused to see, what it decided did not deserve to be remembered. Dona Drake's story is the story of what American racism looked like in the specific context of one of America's most powerful cultural industries. It is the story of what individual human beings do when systemic forces tell them they do not have the right to their own ambitions. It is the story of the resilience and creativity and sheer stubbornness of people who refuse to accept the limitations that are placed on them even when accepting those limitations would be the safer and easier choice. It is also a story about art, about the fact that talent is real, that it cannot be fully suppressed, that it finds its way through the cracks in even the most rigid and restrictive systems. Dona Drake had a gift, and that gift expressed itself, under impossible circumstances, in work that audiences responded to with genuine appreciation. The system tried to tell her that she had no place in its story, and she looked that system in the eye and made herself a place anyway. That is worth knowing about. That is worth celebrating. That is worth telling. This has been the story of Dona Drake, a woman Hollywood never truly knew, a woman history almost forgot, a woman whose story reminds us that behind every carefully constructed public image, there is always a fuller, richer, more complicated human truth waiting to be told. This documentary was produced for educational purposes. All facts presented have been researched to the best of available historical sources. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves history as much as you do. Thank you for watching.